The Canine German Shepherd. Begged for help. What this elderly farmer did will leave you shocked. A canine German Shepherd was lying in the mud, her once strong body trembling, her eyes pleading toward the road that no one had driven down in days. She was abandoned, injured, and alone. Her cries carried across the empty farmland, desperate for someone, anyone, to hear her. No one had come, until an old man in a worn-out truck heard something that made him stop. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity. This story is about a broken soul, a forgotten war dog, and the one person who refused to let her die. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring more powerful and emotional stories like this to life. The wind blew hard across the empty fields of Wyoming. Dust swirled in the air as gray clouds gathered above the far-off hills. It was just another cold morning on the edge of nowhere. Silent, isolated, and forgotten by time. But something broke that silence. A sound. Faint. Trembling. A whimper, maybe? Or a bark? Old Hank Dillard had been tending his land for over 50 years. He was 78 now, his back curved from years of work, his hands scarred and stiff. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but when he stepped out onto the porch that morning, coffee in hand, he paused. There it was again, a desperate, muffled cry carried by the wind. He narrowed his eyes toward the hills, scanning the fields that stretched for miles. At first, he saw nothing but dry brush and distant cattle. But then, near the edge of the barbed wire fence that bordered his land, something moved. Something low, crawling. Curiosity and instinct kicked in. He climbed into his old red pickup truck, the engine rattling to life like an old friend, and started down the dirt path that led to the edge of his property. As he got closer, his chest tightened. It wasn't a coyote or a wounded deer. It was a dog. A large German Shepherd, her body caked in mud, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. Her eyes, deep brown and glassy, locked onto his as she tried to drag herself forward. Hank slammed the truck into park and rushed out. The shepherd didn't growl, didn't bark. Instead, she let out the weakest sound, almost like a whisper of a whimper, and lowered her head in submission. He knelt beside her, ignoring the pain in his knees. "Hey, girl, what happened to you?" he muttered, reaching out slowly. She didn't flinch, but her whole body trembled. There was a collar around her neck, or what was left of one, faded fabric. Letters barely visible. M.P.L. Canine, Hank whispered. He gently brushed away the dirt and saw what remained of the tag. It was a military working dog tag. She was no ordinary dog. She had served. Hank's heart clenched. He'd been in Vietnam. He'd seen what war did to men and dogs. Canines had saved lives, his included. But most were left behind, forgotten. "You poor thing," he murmured. She tried to lift her head again, her eyes pleading. It was clear. She had been left here, abandoned, injured, and she had dragged herself to this fence, perhaps for days, hoping someone would see her. Hank slid his arms gently underneath her body. She was light, too light, malnourished and weak. She didn't resist. She simply let go, trusting him with all she had left. He carried her to the truck, laid her on the passenger seat, and covered her with his flannel jacket. As he drove back to the house, he looked at her again. She was still watching him, even with her eyes half closed. There was something in that gaze. Not just pain, but hope. Back at the house, Hank laid her on an old blanket by the fireplace. He brought her water, warmed up some chicken broth, and watched her sip it slowly. She never took her eyes off him. For hours, he sat there beside her, stroking her head, whispering soft words. He didn't know her story. He didn't know how she got here. but he knew what he saw in her eyes: survival, grit, and trust. The storm outside thickened, rain hitting the windows in sheets. But inside that little farmhouse, a bond had just begun to form. One neither of them expected. Just before midnight, Hank got up to stoke the fire again. He glanced down at her one more time, and that's when he saw it. On her side, hidden beneath the matted fur, was a tattoo, a military serial number, and next to it, scars. Deep ones. "What did they do to you?" he whispered, frozen in place. And as he said it, her eyes opened wide, and for the first time, she growled. The growl wasn't loud. It was more like a rumble from deep inside her chest, restrained, hesitant, but filled with warning. Hank froze, his hand hovering above the blanket as the fire crackled beside them. "Easy now," he said softly, crouching down to meet her eyes. "You're safe here, girl. No one's gonna hurt you." But her eyes had changed. The moment he spotted the scar and whispered those words, something shifted in her. It wasn't just fear. It was memory, deep, painful memory. He sat down slowly on the floor, giving her space. The growl faded. Her head sank back onto the blanket, but her body remained tense. Her eyes still watching him, no longer with trust, but caution. Hank rubbed his face, staring into the fire. He'd seen that look before, in men who came back from war, and sometimes in the mirror. "PTSD, he muttered under his breath. "You've been through hell too, haven't you?" Outside, the storm pounded the roof, thunder shaking the windows. Inside, the two souls, one old, one broken, sat in silence. Just the fire and the storm, and whatever ghosts the shepherd carried. That night, Hank barely slept. He stayed in the recliner near the fire, one eye on the D, one ear tuned to her every breath. She didn't move much. She didn't bark. She didn't eat the rest of the broth. She just lay there shivering from more than just the cold. In the morning, Hank called the nearest vet clinic, 30 miles out. He explained what he could, told them he'd found a German shepherd, likely ex-K9, in bad shape. The receptionist's voice softened when he mentioned the serial tattoo. "Bring her in," she said gently. "We'll be ready." He wrapped her carefully in a thick towel and placed her back in the truck. She didn't resist, but her eyes, they didn't leave him. Even in pain, she watched his every move, as if trying to calculate if she could trust him again. The drive was long and quiet. Hank kept glancing at her. "You got a name?" he asked. "Something they called you out there?" She didn't answer, of course, but somehow she blinked as if she understood the question. He thought for a moment, then said, "I'll call you Shadow. You move like one, and I bet you've seen more than most." At the clinic, the vet, a kind woman named Dr. Emily Carter, took one look at Shadow and frowned. "She's been through trauma," she said, gently examining the old scars. "These weren't just combat wounds. Some of these, someone did this to her." Hank felt the anger rise in his chest. He clenched his fists, but stayed silent. Shadow winced as the doctor touched her leg. "Fractured," Emily said. "Old break. She's been walking on it like this for a while. There's nerve damage, too. But what's strange is this scar here." She pointed to a spot behind Shadow's left ear. "It looks like she was tagged. Like livestock, not military standard." "Tagged?" Hank repeated, confused. Emily nodded. "Maybe someone kept her, after she was retired. Illegally. There are cases where K9s are sold or passed off under the table. Not every handler gets to bring them home. Some dogs end up in the wrong hands." Hank felt sick. Shadow, a war hero, had been treated like property, left broken, used, abandoned. "I'll cover her costs," he said firmly. "Do whatever she needs. She's staying with me." Dr. Carter looked up, surprised. "You're keeping her?" Hank nodded. "She came to my land for a reason. She chose my fence. Maybe I was meant to find her." Shadow lay quietly on the table, her breathing calm now, her head turned toward Hank. Their eyes met again. Less fear this time, more something else. A flicker of trust returning. "You just hold on, girl," Hank said softly. "We're gonna get through this. Together." But as he leaned in, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small patch on her back where the fur had been burned away. Faint letters etched into the skin beneath like a brand. 3 letters, KRX. He froze. "What is it?" the vet asked. "I've seen that before," Hank whispered. His heart pounded. KRX. It's not military. It's private. He stepped back. I think someone was experimenting on her. The letters burned into her skin. KRX. Echoed in Hank's mind long after they'd left the clinic. He hadn't spoken a word on the ride back. Shadow lay curled in the passenger seat, breathing steady, but her eyes opened every few seconds to glance at him. She knew something had changed. Back at the farmhouse, the storm had passed, leaving behind a damp silence. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. Hank lifted Shadow gently and carried her inside, placing her back on the same blanket by the fire. He stood over her, staring into the flames. The letters haunted him. He hadn't seen them since the early 90s. Back when he'd helped another vet buddy on a short-term security job in Arizona. KRX wasn't a company. It was a code, a shadow operation. He remembered the rumor. Dogs that were too aggressive, too unpredictable, or damaged after military use were sometimes acquired by private entities. Groups that didn't follow military guidelines or morality. Places that saw these animals as tools, not heroes. A rumor he never believed. Until now. Hank sat down beside her and reached for her paw. She didn't flinch this time. Instead, her eyes softened just a little. She knew he was trying to understand. Maybe she wanted to be understood. "You were a soldier," he whispered, brushing his thumb across her fur. "Then someone turned you into something else, like a machine." She let out a slow, tired breath. He spent the rest of the day researching. His internet connection was slow but steady enough. Most of what he found was buried behind layers of speculation. No official records, no company registered as KRX, but he found old forum posts written by other handlers. Some spoke about dogs that disappeared after retirement. Others claimed to have seen shepherds with scars, burns, strange behavioral changes. One post stopped him cold. It was from someone named Striker Vet 89. "If you see a shepherd with KRX on her skin, get her away from anyone with a badge that isn't military. These dogs are trained for things we never approved. They don't forget, but they still feel everything." Hank leaned back, swallowing hard. Shadow wasn't just abandoned. She had escaped. That night, he didn't sleep in the recliner. He laid a second blanket on the floor beside her and slept there, just a few inches away. When he woke around 3 a.m., he felt warmth near his chest. She had moved closer. Her head rested beside his arm, and her nose lightly touched his hand. He didn't speak, didn't move. But in the quiet of the dark, the bond between them grew without a single word. Over the next few days, Shadow slowly began to recover. Her leg remained weak, but she started eating better, drinking more water. She even wagged her tail, barely, when Hank returned from the barn. She never barked, never played, but she stayed close. He worked on the porch most afternoons, whittling wood and watching the horizon, while Shadow lay at his feet. Every now and then, she would lift her head and sniff the air, ears twitching, always alert. One afternoon, a truck pulled into the long dirt road that led to Hank's farm. Unmarked, tinted windows, Shadow rose immediately, growling low. Hank stood, heart pounding. The truck didn't come all the way. It stopped about 300 feet away. A man stepped out. Black jacket, cap, sunglasses. He didn't wave, didn't call out, just stood still, watching. Hank stepped off the porch, his old shotgun in hand. He didn't raise it, but he let the barrel rest on his shoulder in plain view. The man stood a moment longer, then turned without a word and drove away. When Hank turned back, Shadow had already positioned herself in front of the steps. Her body tense, eyes locked on the retreating truck. Her instincts had returned. She wasn't just a dog, she was a soldier. And someone had just found her again. The next morning, Hank couldn't shake the image of the unmarked truck. The way the man stood there, silent and still. Like he already knew what was waiting for him at the end of the road. Like he was watching a property he once owned. Shadow hadn't moved from the porch all night. She lay there, head up, ears alert, refusing to relax. Every time a bird flew overhead or the wind rattled the barn door, she growled, not out of fear, but instinct. That part of her training had never faded. Hank poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped outside, standing next to her. "They know you're here," he muttered, staring at the same dirt road where the truck had parked. Shadow didn't look up, but her tail tapped lightly against the porch wood. She had accepted him fully now. But that didn't mean she felt safe. Hank made up his mind. He drove into town that afternoon, something he rarely did. At the local sheriff's office, he sat across from Deputy Lane, a younger man with kind eyes and a clipboard always in hand. "She's a canine," Hank explained. "Military, abandoned and branded with something that ain't right." "You sure it's not a rescue dog or part of a local outfit?" Lane asked, flipping pages in his logbook. "No local outfit burns letters into a dog's skin," Hank said flatly. "And no dog ends up crawling across Wyoming fields unless she's running from something." Lane frowned. "You think someone's tracking her?" "I know they are." Lane took notes, promised to check with the state animal registry, and offered to stop by the farm later in the week. But Hank could see it in his eyes. The disbelief. The idea that someone might be chasing a dog like Shadow just didn't make sense to him. But Hank had seen too much in his lifetime to mistake coincidence for safety. When he returned to the farm, Shadow wasn't on the porch. Panic struck him like a lightning bolt. He dropped his bag and ran toward the house. Then he heard it, barking. Not a whimper, not a warning bark, full, aggressive, throat-ripping barking. He rounded the corner of the barn and froze. Shadow stood between the goat pen and the back fence, teeth bared, tail stiff, barking with rage. Across the field, at the far edge of the property, a drone hovered silently in the air, its small camera lens aimed directly at her. Hank didn't think. He lifted the rifle from the shed, took aim, and fired once. The drone spun wildly, sparks flying, and crashed into the grass. Shadow kept barking for a few seconds more, then slowly backed up to him, her breathing heavy, heart racing. She kept her eyes on the field. "They're watching," Hank muttered. "They're not just waiting anymore. They're searching." That night, he barricaded the doors. The fire was low. Shadow didn't sleep. She paced. Every sound made her stop and listen. She had gone from injured stray to a warrior on guard. And Hank? He felt something inside him stirring. A familiar weight in his chest. The same weight he'd carried when he was 22, crouched in rice paddies with bullets flying overhead. Responsibility. "I've got your six, girl," he whispered as she lay near the fire, eyes still open. He sat by the window, shotgun resting across his lap. And for the first time in decades, the old soldier inside him woke up again. The next morning brought quiet skies and sunshine, but Hank didn't relax. He walked the perimeter, checked for tracks, and reinforced the back fence. He knew they'd come back. Drones didn't fly by accident. and unmarked trucks didn't just pass through. Shadow followed him now, limping slightly but steady. She didn't whimper anymore. She didn't look back. She stayed close. As they walked by the old shed, Shadow stopped. She sniffed the ground, then scratched at a pile of loose hay. Hank moved it aside, and there, buried under old tools, was something he hadn't seen in over 30 years. His army duffel bag. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in an oilcloth, was a photo of his old unit, and beneath that, his field journal. On the inside cover, a name was scrawled that made his blood run cold. KRX Logistics, Handler. Trial phase, 1993. His own signature was below it. And suddenly, it all made sense. He'd crossed paths with them before, long ago. And now, they were back. Hank sat on the cold dirt floor of the shed, staring at the journal in his lap. His hands shook, not from age but from memory, the kind that crawls up your spine and whispers things you tried to forget. He flipped the pages. Yellowed paper, faded ink, tactical notes, coordinates, observations, and then a name underlined several times. Project KRX, his own handwriting, his own words. Shepherds, selected for advanced obedience protocols, stress conditioning, no handler imprinting allowed. Objective, maximum control, zero emotional dependency. He remembered now. The cold metal cages, the screaming, the trainers who wore masks and used tasers instead of treats. He'd only been there for 2 weeks, called in to observe and advise. They never let him near the dogs, just behind the glass. He'd hated every second of it. He remembered watching one shepherd, a female lean and alert, who didn't flinch when her cage was jolted. They called her Unit 12, said she had unbreakable survival instincts. She didn't bark, she didn't beg, she just watched, waited. His chest tightened. Could it be her? Could Shadow be Unit 12? He stood and walked out of the shed slowly, journal clutched in his hand. The sun was setting. The sky above the fields glowed orange and red, casting long shadows across the porch. She was waiting there, as always, her body still, her eyes locked onto him. He sat beside her, placed the journal on the floor, and whispered, "I think I saw you before, long ago." She didn't move. "I didn't help you back then," he continued, voice cracking. "I didn't know what they were doing. I was just a damn consultant. A coward. I walked away and told myself it wasn't my fight." Shadow blinked once, slow and deliberate. "I don't deserve your trust, but I swear to you, girl, I'm not walking away this time." She rested her head on his knee. The full weight of her body relaxed against him. That night, Hank took the journal and scanned every page again. He looked for clues, anything that might tell him where KRX was now. Most of it was useless. Old codes, military jargon. But one page stood out. A map. A handwritten circle drawn around an area near the Colorado border. Test Site B. He marked it on a current map. It was remote. Government land, technically, but isolated. Perfect for hiding something no one wanted found. He didn't tell the sheriff. He didn't call the vet. He just stared at the map for hours, heart thumping. The next morning, Shadow refused her food. Not because she was sick, because she sensed something. Hank noticed it immediately. She stayed by the back door, pacing in place, ears pointed toward the woods beyond the fence. At noon, a noise cracked through the silence. A sharp mechanical click. Hank stood up. Shadow was already growling. He moved toward the porch when a small dart whistled past his ear and embedded itself in the wood. Tranquilizer. He dropped to the ground and crawled back inside, grabbing the shotgun and locking the door. Shadow was by his side, panting, tail low. Her body shook not with fear, but readiness. "They're here," Hank whispered. "They want you back." He peeked through the side window and spotted them, 2 men in black jackets moving through the tree line. Quiet, fast, trained, just like she was. He turned to Shadow. "You know how to defend. You were built for it. But I won't let them take you." Then something happened. Shadow stood tall, ears perked, eyes locked on the window, and she nudged his hand. Gently. Not a push, not an accident, a sign. "Let me lead." Hank hesitated, then nodded. He opened the back door slowly, signaling her to flank left. She darted out silently, low to the ground, disappearing into the tall grass. One of the men stepped out near the shed, and before he could even raise his weapon, Shadow struck. A blur of fur and fury. She didn't aim to kill, only to disable. She knocked him down, clamped onto his arm, and dragged him back out of view. Hank moved out with the shotgun aimed, circling wide, but the second man was already running. Toward the truck, toward a radio. Hank couldn't reach him in time, but Shadow could. She was faster than anyone could have expected. She cut him off halfway through the field and stopped, standing between him and the vehicle. Her body blocked his path. Her growl filled the air like thunder, and the man raised his hands. The man stood frozen, hands in the air, sweat dripping down his temple despite the cool air. Shadow didn't move. She held her ground like a statue carved from muscle and instinct. Her growl had faded into silence, but her message was clear. You will not pass. Hank approached slowly, the shotgun steady in his hands. His boots crunched against the dry earth, and as he got closer, the man's eyes darted between him and the dog. "She's government property," the man said breathlessly. "You have no idea what she's capable of." "I know exactly what she's capable of," Hank replied coldly. "Because she saved my life. Just now. And maybe years ago, too. She's unstable. She's programmed. She doesn't belong with civilians. You're making a mistake." Hank stepped closer until he was face to face with him. "No, the mistake was what you people did to her." He turned to Shadow. "Let him go, girl." She didn't move at first. Her eyes were locked on the man's neck. She was close enough to finish it, if she wanted. But after a beat, she stepped back, calmly, slowly, then returned to Hank's side. The man lowered his arms, breathing heavily. "You don't get it," he said. "If we don't bring her back, they'll send more. She's tagged. She's a liability." "She's free," Hank said. "And you're gonna walk away." "Right now." The man scoffed. "You think this ends here?" Hank stepped forward, the barrel of the shotgun now inches from the man's chest. "I'm not the only one out here who remembers KRX. And if I report what I know to the right people, with that brand still on her skin, I guarantee you won't just lose your job. You'll face charges." The man hesitated. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the wrecked drone field. He stopped once, looked back, then disappeared into the trees. Hank exhaled and lowered the gun. Shadow nudged his leg gently. Her body had relaxed, but her eyes still scanned the horizon. Ever the soldier. Back at the house, Hank lit the fireplace, fed her some cooked chicken, and sat quietly on the floor beside her. His heart was still racing. "You saved me," he said quietly. "You didn't just defend me. You knew exactly what to do." Shadow finished eating and rested her head on his knee. "I think you were never broken," he whispered. "Just lost." That night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He opened the old lockbox in his closet, the one he hadn't touched since his wife passed. Inside were photos, letters, medals, and at the bottom, a dusty tape recorder, one of the last things he had used during his time with the Army Intelligence Unit. He turned it on, and recorded. My name is Hank Dillard. I served in Vietnam, and later as a civilian military consultant. In 1993, I witnessed unethical conditioning experiments on former K9I units under a program labeled KRX. I have reason to believe one of those dogs, designated Unit 12, escaped that program and is now in my care. He continued for over 30 minutes, detailing what he'd seen, what he remembered, and what he now knew. When he finished, he mailed 3 copies of the tape to different places. One to a journalist in Denver, one to an old Army buddy turned attorney, and one to the state representative's office. No more silence. He wasn't going to fail her again. 2 weeks passed with no more visits. No drones, no trucks, just long walks through the pasture, slow recovery, and a new rhythm of life neither of them had known they needed. Shadow began barking again. At birds, at deer, sometimes just at the wind. Her limp faded. Her tail wagged more. She even brought Hank one of his old gloves like it was a tool, nudging it into his lap, waiting for a game of tug. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hank sat on the porch with a mug of coffee and watched her trot through the tall grass. She turned her head to glance back at him, then took off in a playful sprint. The sight made him laugh, loud and real. He hadn't laughed like that in years. But just as he stood to go back inside, he noticed a flicker in the distance, a glint of glass, a shape near the tree line. He narrowed his eyes. Not a drone, not a truck. A man. Watching. Hank didn't move at first. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the silhouette near the tree line. The figure was still, half hidden behind the tall pines, backlit by the final orange hue of the setting sun. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to approach. They were just watching. Again. But Hank wasn't the same man who had found a broken dog weeks ago. He stepped off the porch, shotgun in hand, but not raised. Shadow appeared beside him instantly, silent and steady, her muscles tight beneath her coat. She didn't bark, she didn't growl. She just walked in step with him. Halfway across the field, the figure stepped out. It was a woman this time, black jacket, short hair, no weapon in sight. Her hands stayed low. "I'm not here to hurt her," she called out. "I came to say thank you." Hank stopped. "Who are you?" "Dr. Leah Morris," she replied. "Behavioral specialist. I used to work for the project, back when Shadow was still Unit 12. Shadow stiffened at the sound of her old designation. "I didn't stay long," Leah continued. "Once I realized what they were really doing, I left, but I always remembered her, the only dog that never broke." Hank didn't lower the shotgun. "Why are you here now?" "Because your report got out. That recording you sent? It's making waves. KRX is shutting down. Some of the men who ran it are already under federal review, but they'll try to erase the evidence, including her." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Hank said. Leah nodded. "That's why I came. To tell you, you need to disappear, both of you." Hank raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to run?" "No, I expect you to survive and give her the life she earned." For a long moment, there was silence. Then, Leah reached into her coat pocket, slowly, and pulled out a worn leather file. "These are her original records," she said. "Before they rebranded her, before they erased her name." She walked forward, laid the folder on the ground, and backed away. "I'm not the enemy," she said. "I owed her this much." Then she turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving nothing behind but footprints and truth. Hank knelt down and opened the file. Inside were pages of documents, photographs, and medical records. One paper stood out. K9, name, Raina. Handler, Sergeant Marcus Vance. He whispered it aloud. Raina. Shadow looked up at him. Her ears twitched. Her eyes locked with his. You remember that name, don't you? He said softly. He ran a hand down her back, and she leaned into him. Back at the house, Hank tucked the folder into a metal lockbox and buried it beneath the barn floor. Some truths were better kept safe, away from the world's noise. Over the next weeks, Hank began preparing. He called in favors. Old friends. He sold the land quietly, under a false name. He bought a small RV and packed only what mattered. His journal, the photos, Shadow's supplies, and her new collar. One that said Raina in clear, bold letters. They drove through the plains, the hills, the deserts. No destination, just freedom. And everywhere they went, she changed. She played. She rolled in the grass. She barked at the ocean. She even let children pet her, gently, cautiously, and licked their hands as if trying to remember what kindness felt like. But she never strayed far from Hank. Wherever he sat, she laid beside him. Whenever he coughed in the night, she nudged him awake. She became his protector, his shadow, and his peace. Months passed. One night, parked beside a river under a sky full of stars, Hank looked over at Raina curled up by the fire. You know, he said, voice low, you never really stopped being a soldier. You just finally got to choose your mission. She raised her head, looked at him, then gently placed her paw over his hand. And in that moment, he knew. He hadn't just saved her. She had saved him. If this story inspired you, remember, courage and loyalty can overcome any past. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances, for people and for decks. Because sometimes the most broken souls are the ones who shine the brightest when they're finally seen.